The steam from the lentil soup usually warmed my face, a small comfort against the endless Seattle drizzle. For 5 years, every Tuesday evening, I'd been at Street, Andrew's community kitchen, scooping food for folks who'd been chewed up and spit out by life. I was one of them, in a way. My construction days were long behind me, the creaks in my knees and the ache in my lower back, a constant reminder of 30 years on scaffolding and rebar. My wife, Margaret, God rest her soul, had been gone 3 years now, leaving me in a rental house barely bigger than a garden shed, with nothing but time and a quiet desperation to feel useful. Tonight was no different. November had dug its teeth in early, a bone-deep chill seeping into everything. Inside the old church hall, fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune, casting a yellow glow over the faces in line. The air hung heavy with the smell of soup, stale coffee, and the damp wool of worn coats. My feet screamed from 2 hours of standing. The line was long, maybe 70 people, each one clutching a tray, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched as if ashamed of needing help. I wasn't judging. How could I? I was 67, and the world had a way of reminding you, even at my age, that you're never too old to fall. The elderly woman ahead of me, her face a roadmap of hard living, took her bowl, murmured something that might have been thanks, and shuffled away. I wiped my forehead with my sleeve, the rough cotton doing little to absorb the sweat that prickled there despite the cold, and dipped the ladle back into the steaming pot. Next, please. My voice was a familiar rasp. I looked up. The ladle slipped. Hot soup splattered across the stainless steel counter, burning my skin, but I didn't feel it. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Standing there, at the front of the line, was Clara, my daughter. My heart slammed against my ribs. A trapped bird desperate to escape. She was a ghost. Her once vibrant auburn hair, the kind that caught the sunlight and glowed, was dull, tangled, and matted. Her face, usually so full of life and quick smiles, was pale, hollowed out, the skin stretched tight over sharp angles. Dark circles, like fresh bruises, ringed her eyes, which were themselves empty, completely empty. She wore a thin, threadbare jacket, soaked through and hanging off her like a shroud. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, or eaten in days. "Clara!" My voice cracked, raw and disbelieving. She flinched, as if my voice was a physical blow. Her lips trembled, bloodless and chapped. She clutched the plastic tray tighter, knuckles white against the pale plastic. It wasn't just the sight of her that shattered me. It was the chilling realization that my calls, my letters, my futile drives past that fancy Belltown condo had all been met with silence for months. Her phone number had been disconnected. My letters, sent to the address I'd helped her pay for, came back, stamped, "Return to sender." I'd told myself she was busy with the new baby, with Leo, that Rick, her husband, was just being controlling, but not like this. Never like this. I'd lied to myself. Behind her, barely visible, stood a small boy, 7 years old maybe, thin as a rail. His clothes, little more than rags, hung loose, dirty at the edges. His small arms were wrapped around himself, his hands clamped over his ears, as if trying to block out the harsh realities of the world. His eyes darted around the noisy hall, wide and terrified of everything. Leo, my grandson. The last time I'd seen him, he was playing with a bright red fire truck during a video call Clara had managed to sneak in when Rick was at work. That was months ago. Now, he looked like a ghost of a ghost, a flicker of a child. I couldn't breathe. The clatter of trays, the smell of soup, the harsh fluorescent lights, everything blurred into an indistinct, suffocating haze. "Clara, what? What are you doing here?" I asked again, quieter this time, but the urgency throbbed beneath my words. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then barely a whisper, a broken plea. "Dad." That one word, ragged and desperate, tore through me. I set the ladle down, my hands still shaking, and stepped around the counter, ignoring the confused looks from the other volunteers. The line of people behind Clara shifted, murmuring, but I didn't care. The world could wait. My daughter was standing in a soup line. "Where's the condo?" My voice was rough, urgent, thick with a mix of fear and growing fury. The one I sent $85,000 for? Where's Lily? Where's the baby you just had? Don't you have 2 children? Clara's face crumpled. Tears, real, hot tears, finally spilled down her pale cheeks. She looked down, ashamed, shrinking in on herself. Behind her, Leo whimpered softly, pressing closer to his mother's legs, his small body a tremor against hers. "They changed the locks," Clara whispered, her voice broken, raw, as if speaking scraped against a deep wound. "Rick and Beverly. They said I have no rights to Lily. They threw us out. They kept my baby inside. Dad, I can't get her back." The words hit me like a sledgehammer, each one a separate blow. Threw them out, kept the baby. $85,000. My retirement savings. Margaret's inheritance. The little nest egg she'd left me after decades of teaching. Gone. And this was what it bought. My daughter and grandson, homeless, standing in a soup line. The injustice of it, the sheer cruelty, wrapped around my heart like icy tendrils. "How long?" I asked, the words forced through gritted teeth, barely audible. "How long have you been like this?" "Weeks," she said, still not meeting my eyes, her gaze fixed somewhere on the grimy floor. "We've been sleeping." Her voice broke again, a fresh wave of sobs racking her slender frame. "We sleep in a van. A man here, Sam. He lets us stay in his old transit van at night if I help clean up his garage in the mornings." "A van?" My daughter, sleeping in a broken-down van, parked God knows where in some forgotten corner of West Seattle, while that bastard Rick and his vile mother, Beverly, lived in the condo I'd paid for, cozy and warm, surrounded by the fruits of their betrayal. The image burned in my mind, stark and unforgiving. I looked at Leo again. The boy was shaking, eyes squeezed shut, humming to himself a low, self-soothing drone. He was terrified, starving, filthy. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for years, a primal protector I thought had died with Margaret, roared to life. A cold, hard fury settled deep in my bones. I reached out and gently took the plastic tray from Clara's trembling hands. I set it on the counter, grabbed an empty bowl, and filled it to the brim with soup. Then another, for Leo. I added 2 thick slices of fresh bread, a carton of milk, and a plastic-wrapped apple. Everything I could grab, everything they had been denied. "You're here," I said, pressing the laden tray back into her hands, my voice low and firm, leaving no room for argument. "Eat this, both of you. And then," I continued, my voice steady now, resolute, "you're leaving with me. You're not sleeping in a van tonight. You're not sleeping anywhere, but under my roof." "Dad, she started, but I cut her off. I looked her straight in the hollows of her eyes, letting my resolve pierce through her despair. "No. Get your soup. Eat. Then we're going home. And after that," my jaw tightened, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "we're going to make them pay for what they did." Clara's breath hitched. Leo peeked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes, a glimmer of something I couldn't quite name flickering in their depths. Surprise, maybe, or a fragile, hesitant hope. I didn't wait for an answer. I untied my stained white apron, tossing it on the counter, and told the volunteer next to me, a kindly woman named Martha, that I was done for the night. She gave me a long, searching look, but didn't argue. She must have seen the fire in my eyes, the sudden, fierce purpose. 10 minutes later, the 3 of us stood outside Street Andrews, huddled under the flimsy awning. The rain poured down in relentless sheets, drumming on the pavement like 1,000 angry fists, echoing the tempest brewing inside me. Clara held Leo close, the boy clutching his mother's jacket with both small hands, his face buried in her side. I raised my arm and flagged down a passing yellow taxi, its headlights cutting through the shimmering curtain of rain like a solitary beacon. The cab pulled up, splashing through a puddle. I opened the door. "Get in." Clara hesitated, her eyes wide. "Dad, where?" "Home," I said firmly, my voice leaving no room for questions. I took her cold hand. It was like holding ice, lifeless and numb. "We're going home, and then we're going to make them pay." She looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like months. And in that moment, in those hollow, weary eyes, I saw something flicker to life, A spark. Hope. Small and fragile, but unmistakably there. The wipers scraped back and forth across the windshield, fighting a losing battle against the relentless Seattle rain. Streetlights blurred into smears of gold and white through the water streaming down the glass. The taxi driver, a silent observer of our fractured little family, hadn't said a word since we'd climbed in, just glanced at Clara's tear-streaked face, at Leo curled against her side, and kept his eyes on the road. I stared out the window as we passed, shuttered storefronts and empty bus stops, the city looking as tired and beaten down as I felt. Clara sat pressed against the far door, one arm wrapped tight around Leo, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She thought I couldn't see, but the faint tremors told their own story. Leo had fallen asleep almost instantly, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion, his head heavy against his mother's chest. His face looked so peaceful now, so different from the wide-eyed terror I'd seen back at Street Andrews. My daughter, my grandson, homeless, hungry, cast out like garbage. And where had I been? The question echoed in the quiet confines of the taxi, a brutal self-accusation. I'd sent the money 2 years ago, $85,000. Everything I'd saved from 30 years of construction work, the nest egg Margaret and I had painstakingly built, dollar by callous dollar. Clara had called, her voice small and apologetic, asking for help with a condo down payment. She'd said Rick had found a place in Belltown, a trendy, upscale area, that it would be good for Leo, close to his therapy center. I'd wired the money the very next day. Told myself it was enough. Told myself I was being a good father by helping. But I hadn't asked enough questions. Hadn't demanded to visit. Hadn't pushed when Clara's calls became less frequent. When her voice started sounding strained and tired, like she was walking on eggshells even over the phone. The past few months had been the worst. Her number stopped working. Texts went unanswered. I'd tried calling the condo, the number Rick had given me once, but a recording said it was disconnected. I'd driven to Belltown 3 times, circling the gleaming glass towers, but I didn't know which building, which unit. They all looked the same, all cold steel and reflective glass, monuments to a life I didn't understand. I told myself she was busy. New baby, special needs child. Life was overwhelming. I told myself she'd call when she was ready. I told myself lies. The truth, the one that burned in my chest like acid, was that I'd been afraid. Afraid Rick would answer the door and turn me away. Afraid Clara had moved on, built a life that didn't include her old man, a gruff, aging father who barely scraped by. Afraid of a lot of things when I should have been afraid of exactly what had happened. Dad? Clara's voice was barely a whisper, pulling me from my dark thoughts. I turned. She was looking at me, her eyes red and swollen, her face hollow with exhaustion and something worse, shame. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching, for taking us in. "Don't." The word came out harder than I meant it to, sharp with my own guilt. I softened my voice, forcing the edge out. "Don't thank me, Clara. I should have come looking sooner. I should have—" I stopped, swallowing the rest of that sentence. Blame could wait. Right now, she needed safety. We'll figure this out. All of it. She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, and turned back to the window. The taxi turned onto Rainier Avenue South, and the city changed. Belltown's glass towers and trendy restaurants gave way to tired strip malls, chain-link fences, and houses that had seen better decades. Rainier Valley wasn't pretty. It wasn't the kind of place I'd imagined my daughter and grandkids would end up. But it was what I had. "This one," I told the driver, pointing to a small rental house wedged between a vacant lot and a duplex with bars on the windows. The yard was mostly dirt, the paint was peeling, and the porch light flickered like it was considering giving up the ghost. But the rent was $950 a month, and Mr. Wally Jenkins, the landlord, didn't ask too many questions, as long as the check cleared. I paid the driver and helped Clara out. Leo stirred, a soft whimper, but didn't wake as I lifted him into my arms. He was lighter than he should have been, all sharp angles and jutting bones, 7 years old, and he felt like a feather. The house was dark and cold. I'd left in a hurry to volunteer at Street Andrews and hadn't turned on the heat. I laid Leo on the threadbare couch, tucked an old flannel blanket around him, and flicked on the space heater in the corner. Its orange coils began to glow, promising a warmth that felt like a lifetime away. Clara stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, looking lost, a stranger in a place that should have been a refuge. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the small kitchen table with its mismatched chairs. "I'll make tea." She sank into one of the chairs, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and watched the blue flame flicker to life beneath it, a tiny beacon in the gloom. The house was quiet now, except for the insistent drumming of rain on the roof and Leo's soft, even breathing from the other room. I thought about what I'd say, how to ask the questions I needed to ask without making her feel worse than she already did. But there was no gentle way to do this, no way to make it easier. The kettle whistled, a shrill, piercing sound. I poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea, the only thing I had, and set one in front of Clara. She wrapped her hands around it, clutching the warmth like it was the only safe thing left in the world. I sat down across from her. "Now," I said quietly, my gaze steady, "tell me everything. From the beginning." She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with fresh tears, but also something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. The kind of hope that came from finally, truly, not being alone anymore. And she started to talk. Clara's hands trembled around the now cold mug of tea. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice a raw rasp, "for disappearing, for not calling back. I know you tried to reach me." Her voice cracked. "Rick took my phone. He said I was too unstable. Beverly watched me every day. I couldn't get to you." I nodded, keeping my own voice steady, determined not to let my rising anger overwhelm her. "Tell me what happened. Start from the beginning." She swallowed hard, staring into the swirling depths of her tea, as if the answers lay hidden there. "It started when Leo was born." Her voice was barely above a whisper now, like she was afraid the walls might hear, or that the memory itself would become too real if spoken aloud. "He was beautiful, Dad. Perfect little fingers, perfect little toes." A ghost of a smile, fragile and fleeting, touched her lips. But the doctors, they said he wasn't hitting his milestones, that he was developmentally delayed. They said he'd need therapy, specialists, patience. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. I didn't care. He was my baby. I loved him. I reached across the small table and squeezed her hand, a silent promise of support. "But Rick," Clara's voice hardened, the fragile smile gone, replaced by a bitter line. Rick was different. The first time the pediatrician used the word delay, I saw something shift in his face, like he'd been cheated, like Leo was a bad purchase he couldn't return. My jaw tightened, a familiar knot of fury forming. I'd seen that look on men before, the calculating dismissal of anything that didn't fit their perfect plan. And Beverly, Clara's hands, clenched around the mug. She came to the hospital the day after Leo was born, looked at him in the bassinet, and said, "Well, let's hope he grows out of it. No congratulations. No, he's beautiful. Just, let's hope he grows out of it." The memory clearly stung, fresh as if it happened yesterday. Outside, the rain pounded harder against the windows, a rhythmic, relentless drumbeat against the silence of the confession. As Leo grew, it got worse, Clara continued, her voice gaining a desperate edge. He didn't talk when other kids his age were talking. He'd get overwhelmed by loud noises, bright lights. He'd have meltdowns, full-body meltdowns, and I'd hold him and try to calm him down. But Beverly, Clara's voice broke again. She'd stand there with her arms crossed and say, "A child like this will ruin your life, Rick. He'll hold you back." I felt my fists clench under the table, knuckles white. She said it right in front of him. Dad. Leo was right there. He couldn't always express himself, but he understood. He knew they didn't want him, that they thought he was broken. "Jesus," I muttered, the curse escaping my lips, hot with anger. "Rick started coming home late," Clara continued, her eyes fixed on some distant point, reliving the nightmare. "Said he was working overtime, but he'd smell like perfume, women's perfume. When I asked, he'd tell me I was imagining things, that I was paranoid, that raising a special needs child was making me crazy. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing the fresh tears. Beverly started visiting more. Every day. Sometimes twice a day. She'd walk through our apartment like she owned it, checking everything. How I dressed Leo, what I fed him, how clean the house was. If Leo had a meltdown, she'd pull out a little notebook and write it down. A notebook? I asked, my voice cold, the implications chilling. Evidence? Yes, Clara said bitterly. She kept a list of every time Leo had a tantrum, every time I looked tired, every time I burned dinner or forgot to do laundry. She told me once. She actually told me that she was documenting everything in case they ever needed proof I wasn't capable. My blood ran cold. The calculated, insidious nature of their campaign was sickening. And Rick, he let her. He encouraged her. When Leo would have a meltdown, Rick would grab him by the arm and drag him to his room. He'd lock the door from the outside and leave him in there alone until Leo exhausted himself, crying. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor with a harsh shriek. He locked him in. My voice came out low and dangerous, a rumbling growl from deep in my chest. Clara nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. He said we couldn't let the neighbors hear, that people would think we couldn't control our own child, that it was embarrassing. I turned away, fists shaking, staring at the rain-streaked window, seeing nothing but red. I wanted to break something. Wanted to drive to that Belltown condo right now and drag Rick Miller out by his throat, make him explain how he could do that to his own son. I tried to protect him, Clara said, her voice desperate, pleading for understanding. I'd sneak into Leo's room after Rick went to bed. I'd hold him and tell him he was perfect, that there was nothing wrong with him. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She took a shuddering breath, the memories clearly overwhelming her. Rick started talking about putting Leo in a special facility. Said it would be better for everyone, that Leo would get professional help, and we could focus on having a normal family. Her voice turned sharp with pain, the words laced with an unbearable bitterness. Beverly agreed. She kept bringing up brochures for residential programs, places that would take Leo away full time. I turned back to face her, my gaze unwavering. You said no. Of course I said no, Clara's voice cracked. He's my son, but every time I refused, Rick would get angrier. Beverly would show up more often. The criticism got worse. The isolation got worse. They made me feel like I was the problem. Like if I just tried harder, did better, Owen would be normal, and everything would be fine. The small kitchen felt too small, too dark, suffocating with the weight of her story. I took Leo to therapy 3 times a week, Clara continued. Speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral therapy. I read every book I could find. I joined online support groups. I did everything right. But it didn't matter. Because to them, Leo wasn't a child who needed help. She looked up at me, her face destroyed, ravaged by grief and injustice. He was a mistake, a stain on their reputation. They were ashamed of him, Dad. Ashamed of their own grandson. The words hit me hard, twisting my gut. My grandson, a stain? It was unthinkable. Beverly wouldn't let me bring Leo to family gatherings. Said he'd disrupt things. Rick stopped introducing me as his wife when we went out. He'd just say I was Leo's caretaker, like I was hired help. I sat back down, reaching across the table and taking both her hands in mine. They were still cold, but less tremulous now. You did nothing wrong, I said, my voice rough, but firm. Nothing. You hear me? She nodded, but the tears kept coming, silent trails down her cheeks. I kept thinking it would get better, she whispered, that if I just held on long enough, if I just loved Leo hard enough, Rick would come around, Beverly would back off. We'd be a family. She pulled her hands back, wrapping them around herself, a self-hug of desperation. I was so stupid. You weren't stupid, I said, my voice unwavering. You were trying to protect your son. That's what mothers do. Clara looked at me, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and something worse, something I recognized all too well. Defeat. They were ashamed of having a grandson who was different from everyone else, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain. And they hated me for not being able to fix him. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Outside, the rain continued its steady assault on the roof. Clara wiped her face, took a shaky breath, then looked at me, a new, chilling resolve in her eyes. "But that was just the beginning," she said softly. "The worst part? The worst part came after I got pregnant with Lily." She paused, staring at something I couldn't see, a memory too painful to fully confront. "The worst part is still ahead." Clara took another shaky breath, her hands still wrapped around the now cold mug of tea, as if seeking solace from the ceramic. "About 2 years ago," she said, her voice flat, stripped of emotion, "Rick lost his job. He didn't tell me right away. I found out when I came home one afternoon and saw him sitting on the couch in his work clothes, staring at the wall. When I asked what was wrong, he exploded. Said it wasn't my business, that he'd find something better, that I wouldn't understand." She swallowed, a dry, painful sound. "Weeks passed. Nothing changed. He left every morning like he was going to work, but when he came home, I could smell alcohol on him. Faint at first, then stronger. Beverly started coming over more. Much more. They'd lock themselves in the bedroom and talk in low voices. I wasn't allowed in. I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I watched her face, the exhaustion carved deep into its fragile contours. Then one day, Rick announced we were moving. Said he'd found a condo in Belltown, a fresh start. He said it was close to a therapy center for Leo, that it would be better for all of us. Her voice cracked, betraying the raw pain of the deception. But there was a problem. He needed a down payment. $85,000. My chest tightened, a cold knot forming in my stomach. That was times my times money. Asterisk Margaret's times money. "I didn't know what to do," Clara whispered. "Beverly said it was my responsibility. That if I wanted Leo to get proper care, I needed to help. That I had to prove I was a good mother, a good wife." Tears streamed down her face, glistening in the dim kitchen light. "So I called you." I remembered the call, 2 years ago. Her voice, small and apologetic, saying it was for Leo, for his future. I hadn't asked many questions, so eager was I to help my daughter, to feel like I was still a good father, making up for lost time. I'd wired the money the next day. Every dollar I had saved from 30 years of construction work, every dollar my wife left behind, $85,000. My security, my future, all given without hesitation. "I was terrified you'd say no," Clara said, her voice raw. "I knew we hadn't been close, but I didn't know where else to go. And when you said yes, when you sent the money without questioning it, I thought things might finally get better." I reached across the table and took her hand again, my thumb tracing the back of her cold fingers. "You saved us, Dad," she said softly. "At least, I thought you did, but it didn't last." "What do you mean?" I asked, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. The condo was only in Rick's name. The words dropped like stones, heavy and chilling. "I asked about it," she continued. "Rick said it was easier this way, that we'd add me later. Beverly said it was standard, that I was being paranoid." She laughed bitterly, a hollow, humorless sound. I believed them. I signed where they told me. My jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in my cheek. The betrayal was deeper, more calculated than I had initially grasped. On move-in day, Beverly handed me a folder. Said it held all the paperwork, but later I realized it was just copies. No originals. My name wasn't on anything. I clenched my fists under the table, barely suppressing a growl of anger. Then Rick said I couldn't call you anymore. Said it made him uncomfortable, that you'd already done enough, and I needed to stop bothering you. He took my phone, said I could earn it back when I proved I was stable. Beverly agreed. "He isolated you," I said, the realization hitting me with sickening force. "Completely." Clara nodded, her head bowed in quiet despair. "He kept my phone locked away, monitored my emails. Beverly took my ID, Leo's birth certificate, insurance cards. Said she was helping with paperwork, that I was too disorganized." My chest burned with a furious heat. "I had nothing," Clara said, her voice small and defeated. "No phone, no ID. If I needed to go somewhere, Rick drove me. If I needed a doctor, Beverly made the appointment. I was trapped." Rain tapped softly against the windows, a gentle counterpoint to the storm raging within me. Then I got pregnant with Lily. Her voice dropped to a whisper, filled with a fragile, lost hope. I thought maybe it would change things. Maybe Rick would soften. Maybe Beverly would back off. She shook her head, a silent acknowledgement of her naivety. I was wrong. You weren't stupid, I said, my voice firm. You were surviving. You were trying to find a way through. The pregnancy was hard, she continued. Leo still needed so much care. Rick was distant. Beverly took control of everything. She came to every appointment, told me what to eat, what to say, how to behave. Her hands trembled, reliving the suffocating control. When Lily was born, I fell apart. I had postpartum depression, worse than before. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I'd hold her and cry for hours. My doctor said I needed therapy, medication. They didn't help you? I asked, my voice tight. Beverly said I was being dramatic. Rick agreed. Beverly started writing things down in that notebook while I cried. Rick said I was scaring the children, that I was a bad mother. Something cold settled in my chest, a premonition of the calculated cruelty that was to come. One night, Clara whispered, her eyes wide with the remembered terror. I was exhausted. Lily was crying. Leo was melting down in his room. I put Lily in her crib and said I needed 5 minutes, just to breathe. She looked at me, raw fear etched on her face. Rick heard. He told Beverly. They said I was dangerous, that I'd abandoned Lily. I didn't. I was in the next room. I stood, unable to stay seated, pacing the small kitchen. After that, they watched me constantly, Clara said, her voice flat with despair. Beverly moved into the guest room to supervise me. Rick worked from home. They followed me everywhere. Checked on Lily every 10 minutes. Wrote things down in that notebook whenever I made a mistake. Forgot to burp Lily. Let Leo watch too much TV. Burned the toast. My hands curled into fists, white-knuckled with impotent rage. About a week later, Rick told me we needed diapers. Said I should go to the store. It was almost 10 at night, but he insisted. Said Leo should come with me, that the walk would be good for him. Her body went rigid, remembering the insidious setup. I didn't want to go. Something felt wrong. But I was so tired, and he wouldn't stop pushing. So I took Leo and walked to the pharmacy, bought the diapers, walked back. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the rain. When we got to the door, my key didn't work. Rage surged through me, hot and blinding. Those bastards, I breathed. I thought I'd grabbed the wrong one, Clara said, tears streaming now, her voice thick with the memory of that night. It was dark. I was exhausted. I tried again and again. Then I realized the lock had been changed. I knocked, she continued. I called Rick's name. Leo was shivering beside me. Finally, Rick opened the door just a crack and said, "You can't come in." She covered her face with her hands, the sobs racking her slender frame. He said Beverly told him to take protective action, that I was too unstable to care for the children, that they were keeping Lily for her safety. Her voice broke, a raw, piercing sound. Then he looked at Leo and said, "Take that one with you. We don't need him." I stood, unable to remain seated, the image searing into my mind. He shut the door. I could hear Lily crying inside, a faint, desperate wail. I banged on it. I screamed. A neighbor came out and told me to stop making a scene. Said he'd call the police if I didn't leave. "Did he help?" I asked, my voice choked with fury. "No," she whispered. "He just watched." She took a shuddering breath, reliving the crushing indifference. After 20 minutes, a security guard came, Officer Carter. He said, I was trespassing. I tried to explain I lived there, but I had no ID. So, he escorted me out. Her eyes stared past me, unfocused, lost in the nightmare. Leo and I walked. Shelters were full. The church was closed. We sat in the park until it got too cold. We slept under an awning behind a grocery store until morning. I closed my eyes, barely breathing, the horror of it twisting my gut. The next day, I went back, begged to see Lily. Rick wouldn't answer. Beverly told me she'd file a restraining order if I kept harassing them. Clara looked at me, her eyes empty, devoid of all hope. I went back every day for 3 weeks, every single day, until I had nowhere left to go except St. Andrews. Silence crushed the room, heavy and suffocating. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight, feeling her collapse against me, sobbing uncontrollably into my shoulder. "You're not crazy," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're not unstable. You're a mother, and you're my daughter." She clung to me, a desperate anchor in a world that had betrayed her. "Starting tomorrow," I said, pulling away just enough to meet her eyes, my gaze fierce and determined. "We fight back." "A lawyer," she whispered, her voice still shaky. "Yes," I said, "the best I know." I walked to the old rotary phone mounted on the wall, its cream-colored plastic looking almost anachronistic in our modern world, and pulled out my address book. Marcus Thorne. I dialed, half expecting the number to be dead. It had been at least 15 years since we'd spoken. The phone rang 3 times. "Thorne and Associates. This is Marcus." "Marcus," I said, my voice rough. "It's Art Peterson." A pause, a beat of recognition across the years. "Art Peterson? From the West Seattle Bridge Project?" "My God," he said warmly. "It's been 20 years. How are you, old friend?" "I need a lawyer," I said, cutting straight to the chase. No time for pleasantries. "It's about my daughter, my grandchildren, and $85,000 I sent to a man who's now holding my infant granddaughter hostage." Another pause, longer this time, the warmth leaching from his voice. "Jesus," Marcus said quietly. "That's serious. Tell me what happened." I gave him the short version: Clara, Rick, Leo, Lily, the condo, the money, the locks changed, a baby taken, 3 weeks of homelessness. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "This is bad," he finally said. "But it's not hopeless. Do you have proof?" "Every receipt, every transfer, and a letter from my late wife." "Good," he said, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "I'm booked this morning, but I can come by at 3. Give me your address." "I did." "Art," Marcus said, his voice serious now, cutting through the long-distance static. "This will be a fight. Rick has physical custody. He's probably already consulted counsel. If his mother has money, they'll have resources. They'll try to paint Clara as unfit. But if what you're saying is true, we have a strong case." "I have proof," I said, my voice firm, "and time, and the will." "I'll see you at 3, he said. "It's good to hear your voice, even under these circumstances." "So do I replied. "I'll take any circumstance that gets my granddaughter home." We hung up. I organized the table, receipts in order, Margaret's letter on top, a legal pad ready for notes. By the time Clara woke, the kitchen looked like a war room. At 3 sharp, the doorbell rang. Marcus Thorne stood on the porch, older now, his hair flecked with gray, but his eyes were as sharp as I remembered, gripping a worn leather briefcase. "Art," he said, offering a hand that was firm and steady. "It's been too long, Marcus," I replied, shaking it firmly. He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the small living room, then settling on the kitchen table, the scattered documents. He surveyed them, a thin, knowing smile touching his lips. "All right," Marcus said, his voice clipped. "Professional. Show me everything. Let's see if we can win this." Marcus spread the documents across the kitchen table, like a general surveying a battlefield. The bank receipts first, carefully studied through his reading glasses, each line item scrutinized. Then Margaret's letter, its delicate handwriting a stark contrast to the cold, hard numbers. Then the wire transfer confirmations, stacked neatly, documenting every cent. Clara sat across from him, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a mask of anxious hope. I stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder, feeling the faint tremor that still ran through her. After a long silence, Marcus finally looked up, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. "This isn't direct proof of ownership, Clara," he said carefully, his voice calm, methodical. "The condo deed is in Rick's name. Unless you sign something granting you ownership, which it doesn't appear you did, we can't claim the property outright." Clara's shoulders sagged, a fresh wave of despair threatening to engulf her. But Marcus continued, raising a finger, his eyes sharp. "However, this," he tapped the stack of wire transfers, $85,000, "is substantial. It establishes financial contribution. It shows that Art and, by extension, you, Clara, had a legitimate financial stake in that property, combined with the fact that they changed the locks, forced you out, and are withholding an infant against her mother's will. He set the papers down, his gaze unwavering. We have strong grounds for a civil suit. More importantly, we have strong grounds for a custody petition. Clara looked up, a flicker of renewed hope in her eyes. Custody for Lily? Exactly, Marcus affirmed. And for Leo, if they try to claim you're unfit, our priority is reuniting both children with you. The property dispute is secondary, but it strengthens the case. It shows a pattern of financial abuse and control. I felt Clara trembling under my hand, a silent shiver running through her. They took all my documents, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My ID, Leo's birth certificate, Lily's too. They'll say I abandoned them, that I'm unstable, that I have postpartum depression and I'm dangerous. The old fears nurtured by Rick and Beverly resurfaced, threatening to choke her. Do you? Marcus asked bluntly, his gaze piercing. Clara flinched, then met his gaze with newfound courage. Yes, I was diagnosed, but I never hurt anyone. I asked for help. They wouldn't give it. Then that helps us, Marcus interrupted, a small, grim smile touching his lips. We get your medical records. We show you sought treatment. Depression isn't a crime, Clara. It's an illness. If they weaponized it instead of supporting you, that works against them. He pulled out a legal pad, his pen poised. We need witnesses, he said, writing quickly. Anyone who saw how Rick and Beverly treated you and Leo. Clara hesitated, searching her memory. There was a nurse, Eleanor, at Seattle Children's when Lily was born. She saw Rick yelling at me when I couldn't stop crying. Marcus wrote, Nurse Eleanor Vance. Good. Anyone else? There was a man in my old neighborhood, Mr. Edgar Thompson, the block leader in Rainier Valley. He used to check on Leo and me. He knew Leo had special needs. He was always kind. We'll track him down, Marcus said, making another note. Anyone else? I spoke up. Sam. He owns a gas station on West Seattle Way. Sam's Pit Stop. He let Clara and Leo sleep in his old shuttle van for 3 weeks. He saw their condition. Marcus nodded. That's important. What about the building? He asked Clara. Security cameras. There are cameras, she said. Lobby, hallways, elevator banks. Then we subpoena the footage, Marcus said, his voice firm. If it shows you locked out, escorted away, denied entry, that destroys any claim of abandonment. He tapped his pen against the pad. We also need therapy records, emails, texts, voicemails, anything showing control, threats, or refusal to get you help. I don't have access, Clara said quietly. They took my phone, my papers. We'll subpoena those too, Marcus said, undeterred. Withholding your documents is another mark against them. He looked at her steadily, his expression serious. This won't be easy, Clara. Rick and Beverly will fight. If Beverly has money, they'll hire aggressively. They'll paint you as unstable. They'll twist everything. Clara's face drained of color, her initial spark of hope dimming. But we have the truth, Marcus continued, his voice resonating with conviction, and enough evidence to build a strong case. You're a mother who was isolated, manipulated, and discarded. He folded his hands, leaning forward. This will take time. Hearings, depositions. You'll have to testify. Face them. Face a judge. Can you do that? Clara looked at me, her eyes pleading for reassurance. I squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise of my unwavering support. Can you? I asked softly, my gaze firm, mirroring Marcus's intensity. She inhaled deeply, a shaky breath, then nodded, a resolute tremor in her chin. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes to get Lily back and protect Leo. Marcus nodded. Good. He turned to me. Art, you're a key witness. You sent the money. You have Margaret's letter. They'll come after you too. They'll try to discredit you. Let them, I said, my voice hard, unwavering. I'm not backing down. Marcus smiled thinly, a brief flash of satisfaction. Then we start tomorrow. I'll file the custody petition Monday morning. Until then, write everything down. Every threat, Every conversation, dates, times, everything you can remember. He stood, snapping his briefcase shut. One more thing, he said, his tone serious. They may retaliate. Restraining orders, intimidation. If anything happens, you call me immediately. Day or night. We nodded, understanding the gravity of his warning. Marcus shook my hand, then Clara's, his grip firm and reassuring. We're getting your daughter back, he said. I promise. After he left, Clara and I sat quietly in the dim kitchen, the only sounds the insistent rain and the soft hum of the space heater. Do you think we can win? She asked, her voice small, fragile once more. I looked at the blue folder on the table, at Margaret's letter, at the stack of receipts. I thought of Leo, sleeping soundly in the living room, finally safe. Yes, I said, my voice firm with a conviction that had hardened over the past hours. I do. But as the words left my mouth, I felt the weight settle in. My quiet life was over. The war had begun. The next afternoon, the three of us, Marcus, Clara, and I, stood in the quiet, antiseptically clean lobby of Seattle Children's Hospital. The smell hit me first, a familiar blend of disinfectant, floor polish, and the faint, sweet scent of newborns. That distinct hospital scent that never truly changes, always carries a hint of vulnerability and hope. Clara stood between Marcus and me, hands clasped tight in front of her, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. The tension rolling off her was almost palpable. You sure about this, honey? I asked quietly, my voice low enough so only she could hear. She nodded, a determined set to her jaw. Nurse Eleanor was kind. She's the only one who was. Marcus adjusted his worn leather briefcase, a practiced, almost ritualistic gesture. Let's find her. At the reception desk, a young woman with a name tag reading Sarah looked up with a professional, if weary, smile. Can I help you? We're looking for Nurse Eleanor Vance, Marcus said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the sterile quiet. She's a nurse in the maternity ward. It's important. Sarah frowned slightly, her polite smile faltering. Is this a patient matter? It's a legal matter, Marcus replied, handing over a crisp business card. Nurse Vance is a potential witness in a custody case. We just need a few minutes of her time. Sarah studied the card, her eyes flicking between Marcus's confident expression and Clara's strained face, then nodded slowly. Let me page her. We waited. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Clara shifted nervously, her fingers twisting together. I placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tremor that ran through her. 5 minutes later, a woman in scrubs emerged through the double doors, pushing a rattling cart of medical supplies. She was about 30, with dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, her eyes tired but alert. When she saw Clara, her expression changed instantly. The professional mask dropped away, replaced by genuine concern. Miss Keller? She said, her voice laced with surprise and worry. Oh my God, are you okay? I've been worried about you. You disappeared after discharge, and your number stopped working. What happened? Where's the baby? Clara's face crumpled at the flood of genuine care. Eleanor, she choked out. Nurse Eleanor crossed the lobby, her movements quick and decisive, and pulled Clara into a warm, comforting hug, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. It's all right, honey, she murmured, stroking Clara's hair. Nurse Vance, Marcus interjected gently. Can we talk somewhere private? Eleanor looked at him, then at me, then back at Clara, her brow furrowing in thought. Something shifted in her eyes, recognition, understanding, and a deepening concern. There's a small courtyard, she said, her voice softer now. Follow me. The courtyard was small, a quiet oasis tucked between the imposing hospital wings. A few worn benches, struggling shrubs that tried their best to bloom despite the perpetual Seattle gray, and a dry concrete fountain stood sentinel. We sat, Clara and Eleanor on one bench, Marcus and I facing them, a silent tableau of concern and determination. Tell me what's going on, Eleanor said quietly, her gaze moving between Clara and Marcus. Clara, her voice still fragile but gaining strength with each word, told her enough. The control, the isolation, being locked out. Lily kept from her. 3 weeks with nowhere to go. Each word was a sharp jab, reliving the pain. Eleanor's expression hardened with every word, her jaw tightening. "I knew something was wrong," she said, her voice laced with conviction. "That night you gave birth, your husband and his mother felt off. The way they hovered, the way they spoke to you like you couldn't be trusted. It raised all my red flags." "Do you remember anything specific?" Marcus asked, his pen poised over his legal pad, ready to capture every detail. Eleanor nodded. "Your husband, Rick," he yelled at a billing clerk, "while you were still in recovery, barely 2 hours postpartum. He screamed about insurance and room charges until she cried. I had to ask him to leave the nurse's station. It was completely inappropriate given your state." Marcus wrote quickly, his pen scratching across the paper. "And his mother," Eleanor continued, her voice filled with a quiet indignation. "Beverly. She came while you were sleeping. I was checking your vitals, and she stood over Leo's bassinet. She looked at him and said, 'It's such a shame to have a grandson with problems. People will talk.'" Clara made a small sound of pain, a choked gasp. "She said that in front of him?" I asked, my voice tight. "He was right there," Eleanor confirmed, her eyes meeting mine. "Just a little boy. But he was there. When I told her it was inappropriate, she just waved me off and said, 'You don't understand family matters, nurse. You just worry about the patient.'" Marcus kept writing, his face grim. "Anything else?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated, then exhaled slowly, a heavy sigh. "There's one more thing. If we're talking about Rick's character." Clara leaned forward, her eyes wide with a sudden, dreadful premonition. "What?" "The night after you gave birth," Eleanor said carefully, her gaze softening with reluctance. "Around 10 or 11, I saw Rick in the hallway with another woman. They were close, intimate." The air went still. A cold dread seeped into my bones. "What do you mean?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "They were close," Eleanor explained, choosing her words carefully. His hand was on her waist. She was laughing. "I knew the body language, Miss Keller. It wasn't just a colleague." Clara's face went white, draining of all color, like a fragile drawing erased by a rough hand. "What did she look like?" Marcus asked sharply, his legal mind immediately grasping the implication. "Tall, blonde, professional. A business suit, expensive. Early 30s, maybe?" Eleanor winced, her compassion evident. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure if it was my place." "It's okay," Clara said, shaking her head, the tears now free-flowing, fresh and stinging. "I smelled perfume on him for months. He told me I was imagining it. He told me I was paranoid." Marcus's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "Could you identify her again?" "Maybe," Eleanor said, a thoughtful frown on her face. "I'd recognize her build, her hair. She looked polished, like money. The kind of woman you see in Belltown, not in a hospital at 11 p.m., with a married man." Marcus wrote furiously, filling his pad with notes. "Would you testify to this?" he asked, his voice firm. "Under oath?" "Yes," Eleanor said, without hesitation, her gaze unwavering. "If it helps Clara get her baby back, I will." Marcus handed her a business card. "Call me if you remember anything else." "Anything at all." Eleanor turned to Clara, gripping her hands. "You were a good mother, Clara. You still are. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Clara broke down completely then, the weight of everything she'd endured, the kindness, the validation, finally overwhelming her. Eleanor held her, murmuring soft comforts. I had to look away, the raw emotion too much to bear. We left 20 minutes later, Clara staring blankly out the taxi window, her face still streaked with tears. Marcus reviewed his notes, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That was strong," he said, breaking the silence. "It establishes emotional abuse and the affair. Cheating the night after childbirth, that matters to a judge. It shows a complete disregard for Clara and their family." "Can you find the woman?" I asked, my voice grim. "I'll start tomorrow," Marcus said. "Company records, phone logs. If there's a pattern, we'll find it." He looked at Clara, his expression softening slightly. "How are you holding up, Clara?" "I thought he had decency," she said quietly, her voice hollow. "He doesn't," I said, my voice hard. "And we'll prove it." Marcus's phone buzzed. He made a quick call, his tone terse. I need a background check. Rick Miller, logistics manager, Seattle. Blonde associate, early 30s. Fast. He hung up, his eyes hard, focused. I'll find her, he said, and Rick will regret it. By the time we got back to my neighborhood, the sun was starting to set, painting the gray sky in bruised purples and oranges. Marcus checked his notes in the passenger seat while Clara sat in the back, quiet and exhausted, Leo gently snoring beside her. Mr. Edgar Thompson, Marcus said, referring to his notes. Block leader in your old Rainier Valley neighborhood. You think he'll remember you? He will, Clara said softly, a faint smile touching her lips. He used to check on us, bring Leo cookies sometimes. He was kind. Then, let's go see him, Marcus said, shifting the plan slightly. A little detour. Better to strike while the iron's hot. Mr. Edgar Thompson's house was a small bungalow on South Orchis Street, the kind of place that had probably been there since the 50s. Solid and unassuming. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the porch light was on, casting a warm glow, and a small American flag hung beside the door, gently rippling in the evening breeze. I knocked. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a man in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing reading glasses perched on his nose, and a comfortable fleece vest over a plaid shirt. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice friendly but cautious. "Mr. Thompson," I said, stepping forward. "My name is Art Peterson. This is my daughter, Clara, and her attorney, Marcus Thorne. We're hoping you have a few minutes to talk." Frank's eyes moved to Clara, and recognition dawned, slowly at first, then blossoming into surprised concern. "Clara?" He stepped out onto the porch, his gaze full of warmth. "Good Lord, I haven't seen you in, 2 years? I heard you'd moved to Belltown." His expression shifted, deepening to concern as he took in her tired face. "Is everything all right? Where's Leo?" "He's safe," Clara said quickly, a desperate urgency in her voice. "He's with a neighbor for a little while tonight. But, Mr. Thompson, we need your help." Frank looked between the three of us, his kind eyes assessing the gravity of the situation, then nodded. "Come inside. It's too cold to stand out here." We sat in Frank's living room, a cozy space with worn but comfortable furniture, every surface adorned with family photos, each one telling a story of a life well lived. Frank listened as Clara explained. Not everything, but enough. The move to Belltown, Rick and Beverly's stifling control, Leo being treated like a burden, the night she was locked out, Lily being kept from her. Frank's jaw tightened as she spoke, his face a mixture of growing anger and deep sadness. "I knew something wasn't right," he said when she finished, his voice heavy with regret. "When you moved away so suddenly, I tried calling a few times, but your number didn't work. I thought maybe you'd just moved on, started fresh. I should have checked harder." He shook his head slowly. "You couldn't have known, Mr. Thompson," Clara said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. Still, Frank looked at Marcus. "What do you need from me?" "A statement," Marcus said, his voice calm and clear. "Testimony, if it comes to that. We're building a custody case to get Clara's infant daughter back. Rick and Beverly are claiming Clara is an unfit mother, that she neglected Leo, that she's mentally unstable. We need people who can testify to the truth." Frank didn't hesitate. His gaze was firm, unwavering. "I saw Clara with Leo almost every day for 3 years. That boy has developmental delays, yes, but he was never neglected, never hungry, never dirty or bruised or afraid." He looked at Clara, his voice brimming with conviction. "You took him to therapy 3 times a week. You read to him every night. You were patient when he had meltdowns, even when he was difficult. You were a damn good mother, Clara." Clara's eyes filled with fresh tears, this time of gratitude, not despair. "And if she had postpartum depression after the second baby," Frank continued, his voice rising slightly, "that's not a crime. That's a medical condition. And from what you're telling me, it sounds like her husband and his mother made it worse instead of helping." "Exactly," Marcus said, writing quickly, capturing every word. "Would you be willing to testify to that in court, Mr. Thompson?" "Absolutely," Frank said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "If it helps Clara get her baby back, I'll testify to anything I saw, anything I know." Marcus nodded, satisfied. "Your testimony will help establish that Clara is a capable caregiver, that Leo thrived under her care, that any mental health struggles she had were situational, not chronic, and certainly not a danger to her children. Frank leaned forward, his gaze intense. What else can I do? I'm here. Just name it. Just be ready, Marcus said. We'll be in touch soon. And thank you, Mr. Thompson. Your words carry a lot of weight. As we drove back to my house, Marcus was quiet, staring out the window, processing everything. Finally, he spoke, his voice thoughtful. Art, I think we need to confront Rick. Directly. I glanced at him, surprised. What do you mean? Go to the Belltown condo tomorrow afternoon. The three of us. Knock on the door and demand to see Lily. Show them we're not afraid. Clara stiffened in the back seat, a sudden tremor running through her. Marcus, they won't let us in. They'll call the police. Maybe, Marcus said, his voice calm, unflustered. But I want to see their reaction. I want to record it. Legally, of course. Washington is a one-party consent state for recording. So, as long as one of us consents, we're covered. If Rick or Beverly say something incriminating, it's evidence. Powerful evidence. What if they don't say anything? I asked, skepticism creeping into my voice. They will, Marcus said, a cynical edge to his tone. People like Rick and Beverly, controllers, abusers, they can't help themselves. When confronted, they lash out. They get angry. They reveal their true nature. He looked at Clara in the rearview mirror. Clara, have you ever stood up to them? Really pushed back? No, Clara admitted, her voice small. I was always too scared, too tired. Then they won't expect it, Marcus said, a faint smile playing on his lips. And that's when people make mistakes. I didn't like it, felt too risky, too confrontational. But I also understood the logic, the directness. And what if they call the cops? I asked again, still wary. Then we leave peacefully, Marcus said, his voice firm. We don't touch anyone. We don't trespass. We stay in the hallway, knock on the door, ask to see the baby. If they refuse and call the police, we comply. But here's the thing. Art. If they call the police on a mother asking to see her infant daughter, that looks bad for them, not us. That paints them as the unreasonable ones. Clara was silent for a long moment, wrestling with the fear and the rising resolve. Okay, she finally said, her voice small but firm. Let's do it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, thinking about what we were about to do. Tomorrow, we'd walk into Rick and Beverly's carefully constructed world. We'd knock on their door. We'd force them to face us, to face the truth. And I had no idea what would happen. But I knew one thing. I was ready to see the devil up close. The Belltown condo building rose above us like a monument to cold, hard wealth. Glass and steel, gleaming in the late afternoon sun, reflecting the bruised Seattle sky. Brass doors shone at the entrance, polished to a mirror sheen. Through the vast, high windows, marble floors reflected a crystal chandelier that hung like a frozen explosion, its light catching on leather furniture arranged with deliberate elegance. Each piece likely worth more than my entire truck. Clara stopped on the sidewalk, staring up at the imposing structure, a fortress of betrayal. Leo clutched her hand, his eyes wide and uncertain, his small body tense. You ready? Marcus asked gently, his voice barely cutting through the distant city hum. Clara exhaled shakily, a visible release of tension. No, she said, her voice thin but resolute. But let's do it anyway. We stepped inside. The lobby was cold, polished, and echoing. Our footsteps bounced off the stone and glass, each sound magnified, intrusive. The air conditioning hummed softly. A perpetual, artificial breeze, and classical music drifted from hidden speakers, an elegant soundtrack to our intrusion. Behind a gleaming marble reception desk sat a young man in a sharp blazer. His expression shifted from polite to wary the moment he saw us, especially Leo, who instinctively shrank behind Clara's leg. Can I help you? He asked, his tone already distant, a velvet rope in his voice. Marcus stepped forward, his posture confident, and handed him a business card. Marcus Thorne, attorney. We're here to see Rick Miller, Unit 412. The receptionist glanced at the card, then at Clara, then at Leo, his skepticism deepening. "Is Mr. Miller expecting you?" "No," Marcus said calmly, his voice even and steady. "But he'll want to speak with us. This concerns his wife and children." The man hesitated, his gaze sweeping over us once more, then picked up the phone and spoke quietly, his voice a low murmur. After a moment, he hung up. "He'll be down shortly," he informed us, his tone tight. We waited. Clara shifted nervously, one hand resting on Leo's shoulder, a silent reassurance. I stared at the elevator doors, my jaw tight, my muscles tensed, ready for whatever was coming. 3 minutes later, the center elevator chimed with a soft, melodic tone. The doors slid open with a whisper. Rick Miller stepped out. I had never met him face to face, but I recognized him instantly from photos. Mid-30s, clean cut, a meticulously ironed button-down shirt, expensive office slacks, handsome in a bland, forgettable way. The kind of man who knew how to charm the right people and dismiss everyone else. His eyes, cold and calculating, moved from Clara to Leo to me, assessing, dismissing. His face hardened, a mask of contempt. "What the hell are you doing here?" he said, his arms crossing over his chest. A defensive posture. "And why did you bring them?" His gaze flicked to Leo with open contempt, a sneer twisting his lips. "Take that kid somewhere else. This is a respectable building." My hands clenched at my sides. A primal urge to strike him flared within me, but I forced it down, remembering Marcus's warning. "That kid is your son," I said quietly, my voice barely controlled. "He's her problem," Rick snapped, nodding dismissively at Clara. "Not mine." "He's 7 years old," I said, my voice rising slightly. "A child. Your child." Rick ignored me and looked at Clara, his eyes narrowed. "What do you want? Money? Because you're not getting any. You walked out. You abandoned Lily. You changed the locks," Clara said, her voice shaking but steady, a surprising strength in her tone. "You kept Lily. You threw us out. You left a newborn because you couldn't handle being a mother." "That's a lie," Clara shot back, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce anger. Rick smiled thinly, a cruel, self-satisfied twist of his lips. "I have documentation, doctor's notes. You were unstable, crying constantly, talking to yourself, putting Lily down and walking away. We protected our daughter. We rescued her from your instability." Marcus stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Clara's arm. "Mr. Miller, I represent Miss Clara Peterson. We're here to discuss custody of Lily and Miss Peterson's financial stake in this property, which includes an $85,000 contribution from her father." "A gift," Rick said smoothly, dismissing the sum with a wave of his hand. "No contract, no agreement, just an old man trying to buy his way back into her life." He looked at me, a taunting glint in his eye. "How's that going?" Marcus's voice stayed calm, unperturbed by Rick's taunts. "Then we'll let a court decide. We have bank records, witnesses, and medical documentation showing Clara sought treatment for postpartum depression, not that she was a danger." Rick laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed in the vast lobby. "She couldn't even take her meds regularly. She was dangerous, a danger to herself and to Lily." "I was never dangerous," Clara said, her voice stronger now, fueled by righteous anger. "I asked for help. You refused. You took my phone. Beverly kept my documents. You locked me out and stole my daughter." "Our daughter," Rick corrected, his voice laced with cold superiority. "And I protected her. From you." The elevator chimed again, a gentle, musical note. Sharon Miller, Rick's mother, stepped out. Perfect silver hair, impeccably styled, designer clothes, an expensive handbag clutched in her manicured hand. She surveyed the scene, her eyes narrowed, then spotted Clara and Leo. Her lip curled in a sneer of utter disdain. "Oh," she said slowly, her voice dripping with venom. "Tired of wandering the streets with the special boy? Decided to come back and embarrass yourselves again?" My body went rigid, a roaring fire consuming me. "Careful, Mrs. Miller," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the suddenly tense air. "Everything you say can and will be used in court." Beverly laughed coldly, a brittle, unpleasant sound. "I'm not afraid of court, Mr. Thorne. I won't let my granddaughter be raised by a woman who can't care for herself, or by a man with a temper. She looked at me, her eyes filled with scorn. Do you really think you belong here, Art? I stepped forward, my hands instinctively reaching for her. A sudden, overwhelming urge to silence her hateful words. Marcus held me back, his grip firm on my arm, a silent anchor. You need to leave, Beverly said, her voice rising, before I call security. This is a public lobby, Mrs. Miller, Marcus replied, his voice still calm, radiating an unshakable confidence. We have every right to be here. Call security if you wish. It will only add to our case. Call security! Beverly snapped at the bewildered receptionist, her face contorted with fury. Clara's voice broke, a raw, desperate plea. Please, just let me see Lily. 1 minute. Just 1 minute. No, Beverly said, her voice chillingly final. She's safe with us, away from you. She gestured dismissively at Leo, who was now clinging to Clara's leg, his face buried in her side, trembling with fear. A security guard, Officer Ben Carter, appeared, his movements quick and purposeful. Is there a problem here? These people are causing a disturbance, Rick said, pointing a finger at us, his face a mask of indignation. We're leaving, Marcus said, his voice calm, unflustered. We'll see you in court, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Rick smirked, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. As the elevator doors began to close, Clara whispered, her voice a fierce, defiant vow. Lily, I'm coming for you. The lobby fell silent, the classical music from the hidden speakers suddenly sounding hollow and mocking. Clara shook, Leo clinging to her like a lifeline. Marcus rested a hand on her shoulder. They just made a mistake, he said quietly, a grim satisfaction in his tone. A big one. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming. They admitted they're keeping Lily. Beverly showed clear bias against Leo. That's evidence, Art. I nodded, the anger burning within me. Not a wild, uncontrolled blaze, but a steady, white-hot fire. That, Marcus said, is proof. And this is only the beginning. 2 days after the confrontation at the Belltown condo, I was in the kitchen, making what passed for lunch, canned soup and dry toast, when I heard a car pull up outside. A deep rumble, a faint squeak of brakes. I looked out the window and felt my blood turn to ice. A white sedan, government plates, gleaming dully in the perpetually overcast Seattle sky. Climbing out of it was a woman in a severe gray blazer, holding a clipboard, her face composed and utterly cold. Behind her, a younger man, equally stern-faced, clutched a tablet, and behind them, 2 uniformed police officers stood, their presence a silent, heavy threat. Clara, I called, my voice tight, a warning. Come here, now! She appeared in the doorway, Leo trailing behind her, his small face already creased with apprehension. When she saw the car, her face went white, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. No, she whispered, her voice raw with disbelief. No, no, no. There was a firm knock at the door. I took a breath, forced myself to calm down, and opened it. The woman with the clipboard smiled, professional, polite, and utterly cold. Good afternoon. I'm Miss Evelyn Reed with Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, Mr. David Chen. We received a report regarding a child with special needs living at this address. We're here to conduct a welfare check. My hands clenched at my sides, knuckles white. A report from who? The question was sharp, accusatory. I'm not at liberty to say, Mr. Peterson, Miss Reed said, her smile unchanging, as artificial as a plastic flower. But we take all reports seriously. May we come in? I wanted to slam the door in her face. Wanted to tell her to get a warrant, to stand my ground. But the 2 cops standing behind her, silent and watchful, made it clear that wasn't an option. Their presence was a blunt, non-negotiable force. Come in, I said, stepping aside, my voice tight with reluctant compliance. They filed into my small living room, their eyes immediately scanning everything. The worn furniture, a stack of Leo's therapy workbooks on the small coffee table. The blankets still folded on the couch, where Clara and Leo had been sleeping just that morning. Their gaze lingered, dissecting, judging. Leo shrank behind Clara, his hands coming up to cover his ears, his small body trembling. He was already overwhelmed, already shutting down. That's Leo, Clara said quietly, one hand on his shoulder, a protective gesture. He has developmental delays. He gets anxious around strangers. He gets overwhelmed by new situations. Miss Reed knelt down, trying to make eye contact with Leo, her smile still fixed in place. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Evelyn. I just want to make sure you're okay." Leo pressed his face deeper into Clara's side, trembling, refusing to engage. Miss Reed stood up, making crisp notes on her clipboard. Signs of panic. Non-verbal. "The home is—" She looked around, her gaze dismissive. "Small, cramped. And you're the mother?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm Clara Peterson. This is my father, Art. We're taking care of Leo together." "And you have a history of postpartum depression, Miss Peterson?" Miss Reed asked, her tone clinical, devoid of empathy. Clara's face crumpled. "How do you—" "It's in the report," Miss Reed said, cutting her off, her voice flat, "along with concerns that you're unable to provide adequate care for a special needs child, that you were recently homeless, that you've exhibited signs of instability." "That's a lie," I said, my voice hard, refusing to be silenced. "My daughter is getting treatment. She loves her son. Leo is clean, fed, and safe. Look around. This house might be small, but it's clean. He has a bed. He has food. He has people who love him." Miss Reed's colleague, Mr. Chen, was taking photos on his tablet, his movements efficient and dispassionate, of the living room, the cramped kitchen, Leo's blankets, everything. "Mr. Peterson," Miss Reed said, her voice patronizingly gentle, "I understand this is difficult, but we have to consider Leo's best interests. A small, crowded home, a mother with documented mental health issues, an elderly guardian who may not be equipped to handle a child with significant behavioral needs." She looked at Leo, still hiding behind Clara, her expression betraying a prejudgment. "And the child is clearly distressed." "He's distressed because you're here," Clara said, her voice breaking, a sob catching in her throat. "He's scared of strangers. That doesn't mean he's being neglected." Miss Reed made another note, her pen scratching loudly on the paper. "We may need to place Leo in temporary foster care while we conduct a full investigation, Miss Peterson, just for a few days." "No!" Clara's voice was sharp, a primal scream of a mother whose child was threatened. "You can't do this," I said, stepping forward, my own voice raw with desperation. "If you take him away from his mother, he'll be terrified. He won't understand. It'll traumatize him." "Mr. Peterson, I understand your concern. But what's going on here?" We all turned. Mr. Edgar Thompson, my neighbor and Clara's old block leader, was standing in my open doorway, hands on his hips, looking at the scene with sharp, assessing eyes. Relief flooded through me, swift and overwhelming. "Frank," I said, calling him by the name he preferred. "I'm the block leader for this street," Frank said, stepping inside without invitation, his presence radiating a quiet authority that instantly changed the atmosphere. "If there's something happening with one of my neighbors, I need to know about it." Miss Reed straightened, her professional composure momentarily ruffled. "This is a Child Protective Services matter, sir. It doesn't concern." "It concerns me if you're accusing one of my neighbors of neglect," Frank interrupted, his voice firm, unwavering. He looked at Miss Reed's clipboard. "What's the allegation?" Miss Reed hesitated, then said, "We received a report that a special needs child is living in inadequate conditions with a mother who has mental health issues and an elderly guardian." Frank snorted, a dismissive sound. "Inadequate conditions? I've been in this house a dozen times. It's clean. It's safe. Leo has his own space, his own things. And as for Clara," he looked at her, his gaze full of steady support. "She's been taking care of that boy for 7 years. I watched her do it. Therapy appointments 3 times a week, special diet. Patience I've never seen in my life, sir." He looked back at Miss Reed. "With all due respect, and if Leo's being mistreated," Frank continued, his voice resonating with conviction, "I would have been the first person to report it. I'm a mandatory reporter. I know the signs. And what I see here is a family doing their best in a tough situation." He walked over to Leo and crouched down, his voice gentle, reassuring. "Hey, buddy. Remember me, Mr. Frank?" Leo peeked out from behind Clara, his eyes wide. After a moment, he nodded, a tentative agreement. You like it here? Frank asked. With your mom and your grandpa? Leo nodded again, more firmly this time. You want to stay here? Leo lunged forward and wrapped his arms around Clara's waist, clinging to her like she was the only solid thing in the world. Frank stood up and looked at Miss Reed, his eyes challenging. There's your answer. Miss Reed exchanged a glance with Mr. Chen. She looked at the two police officers, who had remained silent and impassive the entire time, then back at Frank, her composure finally cracking. All right, she said slowly, her voice betraying a hint of frustration. For now, Leo can remain in the home, but we'll be opening a case file. We'll be conducting follow-up visits, and if we see any signs of neglect or instability, we will intervene. You do that, Frank said, his voice flat, but laced with a clear warning. And you'll find the same thing every time. Miss Reed gave me a long, hard look, her eyes promising future scrutiny. Mr. Peterson, I hope you understand the seriousness of this situation. I do, I said, meeting her gaze squarely. And I also understand that someone made a false report to weaponize your agency against my family. That, Miss Reed, is also a serious situation. Miss Reed didn't respond. She and Mr. Chen headed for the door, the two officers following, their presence receding like a fading threat. When the door closed behind them, I felt my knees go weak, the adrenaline draining from my body, leaving me utterly spent. Clara collapsed onto the couch, pulling Leo into her arms, sobbing into his hair. Leo clung to her, silent but safe, his small face buried in her neck. Frank put a hand on my shoulder. You okay, Art? Thanks to you, Frank, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. You saved us. They'll be back, Frank said quietly, his eyes scanning the quiet street outside. Whoever called them in, they're not done. I know, I said, my gaze fixed on Clara and Leo, a new resolve hardening within me. Frank left a few minutes later, after making sure we were truly okay. I sat down on the couch beside Clara and Leo, all of us too exhausted to speak, too drained to do anything but hold each other close. That evening, as the last vestiges of daylight faded and the rain continued its relentless patter, my phone rang. I answered on the second ring, my heart hammering with a fresh wave of anxiety. Hello? Art, Marcus's voice came through, without preamble, urgent and serious. I found something about Rick, something big. What is it? I asked, my blood running cold. There was a pause, a moment of loaded silence. It's bad, Art, Marcus said, his voice grim. Really bad. I need to come over tomorrow morning. We need to talk. This changes everything. That evening, after the CPS workers were gone and Leo was finally asleep, curled up on the couch, my phone rang again. Marcus, I answered on the second ring, my voice tight with a mixture of dread and anticipation. What did you find? Rick's former employer, Marcus said without preamble, his voice devoid of emotion, purely factual. A logistics company called Pacific Northwest Logistics. They have an employee assistance program, specifically a therapy fund for employees with special needs children. I felt my chest tighten, a cold premonition settling in my gut. Go on. Rick filed claims with that fund. Over the past 2 years, he received $12,000. The money was supposed to cover therapy sessions for Leo. Speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral therapy. All documented, all approved. But Leo never got proper therapy, I said slowly, the sickening realization beginning to dawn on me. Clara, who had been listening from the corner of the small living room, went pale, her eyes fixed on me, wide with dawning horror. Exactly. Marcus's voice was grim, a cold, hard truth. I contacted every registered therapy center in the Seattle metro area. I checked records, cross-referenced Leo's name and date of birth. Nothing. Not a single center has any record of Leo Miller receiving consistent treatment. A few one-off visits years ago when Clara was still fighting for it, but nothing recent. Nothing that would account for $12,000. I sat down heavily on the couch, the worn springs groaning beneath my weight. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. So he stole it, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He embezzled it, Marcus corrected. He filed fraudulent claims, received funds designated for his son's medical care, and used that money for personal expenses. That's fraud. That's theft. And depending on how the company handles it, it could be criminal. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. He didn't just abandon Leo. He used him. He exploited our son's disability to steal money. Her voice was a broken whisper, filled with a fresh wave of betrayal. Yes, Marcus said, his voice firm, unwavering. And that's exactly what we're going to tell the judge. Rick didn't just neglect Leo's needs. He actively profited from them. He took money meant to help his disabled son and spent it on himself, on Beverly, on maintaining that fancy Belltown condo. He prioritized his lifestyle over his son's well-being. I felt rage building in my chest like a furnace, a blazing inferno of fury. What kind of father does that? The kind who doesn't deserve custody of any child, Marcus said, his voice clipped and precise. This is a strong argument, Art. Very strong. Combined with the financial contribution you made for the condo, the witness testimony from Nurse Eleanor and Mr. Thompson, and the fact that Rick and Beverly kicked Clara out, we're building a compelling case. The pieces are all falling into place. Clara was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. But these were different tears, tears of revelation, not despair. I always wondered why Leo never got better, why he struggled so much, she whispered, her voice choked. Rick kept saying therapy wasn't working, that we'd try something different, but there was never anything to try. Now I know why. He lied to me. He lied to us both. He took advantage of your trust and your son's vulnerability, Clara, Marcus said gently, his voice full of a rare compassion. That's a pattern of abuse, not just emotional, but financial. Can we use this in court? I asked, my voice tight. Absolutely. I'll subpoena the records from Pacific Northwest Logistics. I'll get documentation of every claim Rick filed, every dollar he received, and I'll show that none of that money went where it was supposed to go. This isn't just a betrayal, it's a crime, and it paints a very clear picture of Rick's character and priorities. Marcus paused, a beat of silence on the line. But there's one more thing we need. What? Security footage, Marcus said. From where? I frowned. The Belltown building, the night Clara was locked out. There are cameras in that lobby, in the hallways. If we can get footage of Clara banging on the door, begging to be let in, crying while holding Leo, and then being escorted out by security. Marcus's voice sharpened, his words gaining speed. That footage would destroy any claim that Clara abandoned Lily. It would show exactly what happened, a visual confirmation of their cruelty. After this long? I asked, a pang of doubt. They'd still have it? Depends on the building system. Most modern buildings keep footage for 30 to 90 days. Some keep it longer if there's a server backup. It's been about 3 weeks since that night. We're cutting it close, but it's worth trying. This is too important to leave to chance. How do we get it? I asked, clearing my throat, my voice hoarse. We go to the building manager, politely request access. If they refuse, I'll file a subpoena, but that takes time. Better if we can convince them to cooperate voluntarily. Marcus hesitated, a rare note of caution in his voice. There's a risk, though. If Rick or Beverly find out we're asking for footage, they might try to have it deleted. They've shown they'll stop at nothing. Then we go tomorrow, I said, my resolve firm. First thing. No delay. Agreed, Marcus said. I'll meet you there at 9 a.m. We'll talk to the property management office, see what we can find. Art, his tone softened slightly, a rare moment of empathy. I know this has been hard, but we're getting close. Every piece of evidence we find makes the case stronger. Each step brings us closer to Lily. What if the footage doesn't exist? Clara asked, her voice small, fragile with uncertainty. Well, then we keep fighting with what we have, Marcus said, his voice reassuring. But if it does exist, if we can show a judge exactly what happened that night, Rick and Beverly won't have a leg to stand on. Their carefully constructed narrative will crumble. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, the only sound the soft whir of the space heater. Clara curled up beside me, her head on my shoulder, finding solace in my presence. He stole from Leo, she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet anguish. From his own son, from a child who needed it. I know, I said, my arm wrapped around her, holding her tight. And he's about to lose everything because of it. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing the grim truth. Then, do you think we can win, Dad? I thought about the blue folder, about Margaret's letter, a beacon from the past guiding our way, about Mr. Thompson's unwavering testimony and Nurse Eleanor's compassionate witness statement, about the $12,000 Rick had stolen and the baby girl he was keeping from her mother. I thought about the fury burning within me, cold and steady, and the fierce, protective love for my daughter and grandchildren. Yeah, I said, my voice firm with renewed conviction. I think we can. The next morning, the three of us, Marcus, Clara, and I, drove back to the Belltown. This time, we didn't go to Rick's unit. We went to the building management office on the ground floor, a discreet frosted glass door labeled Property Management, tucked into a corner of the opulent lobby. Inside, a woman in her 40s sat behind a desk, typing briskly on a computer. Her nameplate read, Sandra Cooper, Property Manager. Marcus stepped forward and handed her his card. Good morning, Miss Cooper. I'm Marcus Thorne, attorney. I'm representing a former resident of this building in a custody case. We're hoping to request access to security footage from approximately 3 weeks ago. Sandra looked at the card, then at us, her expression unreadable. Security footage? What date? Marcus gave her the exact date, the night Clara had been locked out. Sandra frowned, a slight crease forming between her brows. That's unusual. Can I ask what this is regarding? My client was unlawfully evicted from her residence, Marcus said, his voice calm and authoritative, leaving no room for argument. We believe the footage will show that she did not abandon her infant daughter, as has been claimed, but was in fact forcibly removed from the premises. Sandra's expression shifted. Curiosity, maybe, or a flicker of concern. I'll need to check with my supervisor and possibly legal counsel, she said, her voice cautious. Of course, Marcus said, a polite nod. But I want you to know we can obtain this footage through a court subpoena if necessary. However, that process takes time, and by then the footage may be overwritten or lost. If this building cooperates voluntarily, it would be greatly appreciated. It could save a child from further distress. Sandra hesitated, then nodded slowly. Let me make some calls. Can you wait? We'll wait as long as it takes, Miss Cooper, I said, my gaze steady, letting her see the unwavering determination in my eyes. As we sat in the small, impersonal waiting area, Clara's hand found mine, her fingers intertwining with mine, a silent prayer. If that footage exists, she whispered, her voice filled with a desperate hope, they'll see the truth, Dad. They will, honey, I said, squeezing her hand, my heart aching for her, and Rick and Beverly Miller would have nowhere left to hide. The building management office was tucked into a corner of the Belltown lobby, hidden behind a frosted glass door labeled Property Management. Inside, a man in his mid-40s sat behind a cluttered desk, phone pressed to his ear. He glanced up when we entered, raised one finger, and finished his call. Sorry about that, he said, hanging up, a weary smile on his face. Paul Henderson, Property Manager. How can I help you? Marcus stepped forward and handed him a business card. Marcus Thorne, attorney. This is my client, Clara Peterson, and her father, Art Peterson. We're requesting access to security footage from this building. Paul studied the card, then looked at Clara. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or a surge of memory. What date are we talking about? Marcus gave him the exact night Clara had been locked out. Paul frowned. That was about 3 weeks ago. We usually retain footage for 30 days, Mr. Thorne, Paul explained. After that, it's overwritten automatically. You're very close to the cutoff. He hesitated, looking genuinely concerned. If it's past that window, it may already be gone. My stomach dropped. A cold dread settled in. Clara squeezed my hand hard, her grip desperate. So, it's deleted? I asked, my voice rough. Paul held up a hand. Not necessarily. Let me check. He turned to his computer and typed quickly, his fingers flying across the keyboard. We waited in silence, broken only by the clicking of keys and the hum of the air conditioner. The seconds stretched, taut with anticipation. After a long moment, Paul leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. The local system has been overwritten, he said slowly, confirming my worst fears. But, He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes scanning something I couldn't see. We maintain a central backup server for flagged incidents, complaints, internal reviews, liability issues. And? Marcus pressed, his voice tight. There's an entry, Paul said, his voice gaining a note of surprise. Footage from the lobby and hallway that night was archived due to an incident report. There's a strong chance it still exists. I exhaled for the first time in minutes, a ragged, shaky breath. Clara's hand gripped mine, tears welling in her eyes. Can you release a copy? Marcus asked, his voice steady once more. Paul shook his head. Not directly. That requires a court order and approval from corporate legal, but I can flag the footage internally as evidence related to an active judicial matter. When the subpoena comes, we'll release it immediately. It will be protected. Please, I said quietly, my voice filled with a desperate plea. That footage could decide my daughter's future, my granddaughter's future. Paul looked at Clara, really looked at her. Her tired eyes, her tense posture, the way she was holding herself together with sheer will. He saw the pain, the vulnerability, the fierce maternal love. I'll do everything I can, he said, his voice softened with empathy. Give me a moment. He picked up his desk phone. Officer Carter, can you come to the office? He hung up and turned back to us. The security guard on duty that night. If he remembers anything, it could help. 2 minutes later, the door opened. A man in his early 30s stepped inside, wearing a security uniform. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Clara. You, he said softly, a flicker of recognition and regret in his gaze. Clara nodded, her face still streaked with tears. Me. I'm sorry, Officer Carter said, his voice low. About that night, I was just doing my job. We understand, officer, Marcus said, but we need you to tell us what you remember. Everything. Officer Carter took a breath, recalling the events. It was late, around 10 or 10:30. Mr. Miller called security, said there was a disturbance. When I got there, she was sitting outside the unit, holding a little boy. Both of them were crying. She kept saying she lived there, that her baby was inside. What happened next? Marcus asked, his pen poised. Mr. Miller opened the door a crack. His mother stood behind him. They said she didn't live there anymore, that she was trespassing. Officer Carter hesitated, a visible conflict in his eyes. His mother told me, just leave her out there, officer. Let her learn a lesson. My chest tightened with renewed fury at Beverly's callousness. And you escorted her out? Marcus asked, his voice flat, factual. Yes, Officer Carter said quietly, his gaze meeting Clara's. They were the leaseholders. I didn't have a choice. I was just following orders. Is there video? Marcus asked. Officer Carter nodded. Hallway cameras caught everything. I reviewed it afterward, as part of my report. Her sitting there, the door opening, me walking her out. Clara swallowed hard, tears tracing paths down her face. I don't blame you, officer. Marcus wrote quickly, capturing the officer's testimony. Would you testify in court, Officer Carter? Officer Carter hesitated, glancing at Paul. I don't want to lose my job, sir. Paul spoke firmly. You won't, officer. If subpoenaed, you're legally protected. Your testimony is critical evidence. It is your duty. Officer Carter looked at Clara, then at me, then at the floor. He took a deep breath. I'll testify, he said, his voice firm with a new resolve. It wasn't right what they did. Marcus smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up his face. Thank you, officer. Thank you very much. We left 20 minutes later. Paul had flagged the footage. Officer Carter had given his contact details. As we climbed into a taxi, the weight on my chest eased, replaced by a surge of hope. The footage still exists, I said, a profound relief washing over me. And we have a witness, Marcus replied, his voice brimming with satisfaction. What Beverly said, that's damning. Let her learn a lesson, combined with video of Clara crying, holding Leo, locked out of her home. This is powerful evidence, Art. This is the truth. Undeniable. Clara leaned against me, tears slipping down her face. But these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief, tears of vindication. The taxi pulled away from the curb, a silent victory celebrated in the small, confined space. Marcus opened his laptop, typing quickly, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. Then he looked up, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "I found her," he said. "Found who?" I asked, my heart pounding. "The woman Nurse Eleanor saw with Rick." He turned the screen toward us. A professional headshot of a blonde woman in her early 30s filled the screen. "Charlotte Davies," Marcus said, his voice crisp. "Logistics manager. Same company Rick worked for. 2 years of frequent contact. She's higher up the ladder, well connected." Clara stared at the screen, her face pale. "That's her," she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of pain and bitter recognition. Marcus closed the laptop with a snap. "Now," he said, his voice firm, "we prove it. We expose it all." The taxi wound through the Pearl District rain, streaks of water running down the windows in thin, wavering lines. The city outside looked blurred and distant, like something already slipping away, a memory fading. Marcus sat beside me with his laptop balanced on his knees, the pale glow of the screen illuminating his face, revealing the network of fine lines around his sharp eyes. "Here," he said quietly, turning the screen toward us. It was a LinkedIn profile. A polished headshot filled the screen. Sleek blonde hair, sharp cheekbones, and a confident smile that looked expensive, the kind of smile shaped by private schools, polished manners, and quiet entitlement. Charlotte Davies, Marketing Director, Cascade Holdings, Mercer Island, Washington. Clara stared at the photo, the color draining from her face, leaving her ghost pale. "She's beautiful," she whispered, the words tinged with a raw, undeniable ache, and rich. Very rich. "Indeed," Marcus confirmed, a grim note in his voice. "Her family owns multiple property development firms across the Northwest. She grew up on Mercer Island, private schools, an MBA from the University of Washington. She's ambitious, connected, and exactly the kind of woman Beverly Miller believes her son deserves. A trophy, a step up in their social climbing." My jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in my cheek. The cold calculation of their plans sickened me. How long has this been going on? Marcus scrolled, pulling up a series of emails and call logs, digital breadcrumbs detailing a secret life. I spoke with a former colleague of Rick's, someone who left the company under less than friendly circumstances. He confirmed Rick and Charlotte have been involved for a long time. The affair began about a year before Leo was born, Clara. Long before Lily. Clara let out a broken sound, a choked gasp of disbelief and pain. "A year before Leo," she said softly, the words hanging heavy in the air. "So when I was pregnant, when I was sick, when I was trying to keep everything together and Rick was distant, cold." She couldn't finish the sentence. The enormity of the betrayal too overwhelming. I reached for her hand. It was cold, trembling violently. "Don't cry for him, honey," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "He never earned your tears. He's not worth it." But the tears came anyway, silent and bitter, slipping down her cheeks, a quiet torrent of grief and anger. Marcus closed the laptop partway, his expression grim. "There's more. Beverly knew about Charlotte. Not only knew, she encouraged it." Clara looked up sharply, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Encouraged it?" "Yes," Marcus said, disgust evident in his voice. "Beverly believed Rick needed an upgrade. Someone from a better family, someone with money and influence. According to my source, Beverly actively pushed Rick toward Charlotte. She told him you were a liability, Clara, that you were holding him back, that Leo was a burden and you were too weak to handle it." Rage burned in my chest, a white-hot inferno. "So, they weren't just trying to get rid of Clara," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "They were planning to replace her, to erase her entirely." "Exactly," Marcus replied, his voice clipped and precise. "They wanted Clara erased, to make it appear she'd abandoned the family. Rick would become the sympathetic single father, struggling nobly with an infant daughter. Eventually, he marries Charlotte. They present the perfect picture: wealthy, stable, respectable, no depressed wife, no disabled child, a story of triumph over adversity, all built on a foundation of lies and cruelty." Clara squeezed my hand harder, her knuckles white. That's why they kept Lily. She's proof. Proof he's a good father. Precisely, Marcus confirmed. Lily fits the image. A beautiful baby girl, a future stepmother with money and status. A narrative Beverly can tell proudly at her country club functions. A perfect family portrait for their social circles. And Leo? Clara whispered, her voice filled with a mother's heartbreaking fear. What about my son? Marcus's voice softened, filled with a rare, genuine pity. Leo didn't fit the narrative, Clara. He was inconvenient. He was the inconvenient truth that undermined their perfect facade. So they pushed him out. And you with him? Clara cried openly now, her shoulders shaking with uncontrolled sobs, the full weight of the calculated betrayal crushing her. I wrapped an arm around her, holding her tight, a shield against the cruel world. So my granddaughter is just a prop in their social climbing? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, filled with a profound sadness. I'm afraid so, Art, Marcus said, but now we expose it. I'm subpoenaing Charlotte Davies. She'll have to testify about the affair. When it started, whether Beverly encouraged it, whether she knew Rick was still married when he was pursuing her. Will she come? Clara asked, lifting her tear-streaked face. She won't have a choice, Marcus said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. And someone like Charlotte, with a career dependent on appearances and a reputation to uphold, won't risk contempt of court. The truth will come out, and her carefully constructed image will be shattered. He closed the laptop with a definitive click. Once she testifies, Rick's story collapses. He can't claim abandonment while planning a replacement. Beverly can't claim she acted in Lily's best interest while orchestrating the whole thing. The whole rotten foundation will be exposed. The taxi stopped in front of my house. Rain still soaked the pavement as we stepped out, the damp air clinging to us. Marcus tucked his laptop under his coat, his expression resolute. Inside, Leo was asleep on the couch, curled beneath a blanket, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. Clara went to him immediately, kneeling beside him, smoothing his hair, checking his breathing, a fierce, protective love radiating from her. Marcus set down his briefcase with a soft thud. I'll start drafting the custody petition tonight. We'll file within the week. Are you ready, Clara? Clara looked up, her eyes red but resolute, a steel core forming within her. Yes. Once we file, Marcus warned, his voice serious. There's no turning back. It'll get ugly. They'll fight dirty. They'll throw everything they have at you. Let it, Clara said, her voice firm, unwavering. I want my daughter back. I want my son safe. Marcus nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. Then we fight. After he left, Clara sat beside Leo, watching him sleep, her hand gently stroking his hair. I made tea. Neither of us really drank, and sat across from her at the small kitchen table. You okay? I asked, my voice soft. No, she said, her gaze fixed on Leo's peaceful face. But I will be. When Lily is home. When we're all safe. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, thinking of Charlotte Davies' perfect, calculating smile, and Beverly Miller's cold, manipulative eyes. Thinking of Lily, my infant granddaughter, being used as a prop in someone else's despicable story of ambition and deceit. In 1 week, we'd file the petition. We'd take them to court. We'd fight for custody and for truth. But first, there was one more thing I had to do. I had to go through my wife's things, the documents I'd avoided since she died, since the cancer took her away. Because if Margaret left that letter, that profound, prophetic warning, there might be more. More proof, more truth. And I needed every weapon I could find. Every single one. 2 days later, Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table, a calculator and a stack of papers between us, casting a professional air over my humble home. Filing the custody petition will cost about $2,500, he said, his voice flat, purely factual. That covers court fees, document processing, and initial administrative costs. I'm waiving my fees for now. We'll settle that later, but the court won't budge on their charges. These are non-negotiable. I opened the drawer where I kept my checkbook, a small, worn ledger that chronicled my dwindling finances. I looked at the balance. $680. That was it. Everything I had left after sending Clara the $85,000, after paying rent, after keeping us fed for the past few weeks, after the unexpected visit from CPS and the taxi fares. The well was dry. "I don't have it, Marcus," I said quietly, the words feeling heavy, shameful. Clara, sitting beside me, reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine, offering silent support. "Dad, if it's too expensive, maybe we should stop. I don't want you to have to sell anything else. You've already given up so much for us." "No," I said firmly, my gaze meeting hers, unyielding. "We're not stopping. Not when we're this close. Not when we have so much on our side." But my mind raced, desperate for a solution. What if I move? I looked at Marcus, a sudden thought sparking. To somewhere smaller, cheaper? Can I get the rent back from the months I've already paid on this place? Marcus considered, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his chin. "Depends on your lease and your landlord, Art. If you're willing to vacate early, some landlords will refund a portion. It's worth asking. It's certainly a viable option to free up some capital." "Then I'll ask," I said, a renewed determination in my voice. Frank Thompson had offered to come with me when I went to see Mr. Wally Jenkins, my landlord. Wally lived 3 blocks away in a neat little house twice the size of mine, with a tidy lawn and a well-maintained pickup truck in the driveway. He answered the door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, looking surprised to see us, his brow furrowed in mild concern. "Art? Frank? Everything all right. Can we talk, Wally?" I asked, cutting to the chase. He invited us in, ushering us into his cozy living room, a space filled with comfortable furniture and framed family photos on the walls, radiating a sense of stability and warmth that felt miles away from my own turbulent life. We sat, and I explained. Not everything, just enough. My daughter, my granddaughter, the custody fight, the court fees I couldn't afford. Wally listened, his expression thoughtful, his kind eyes taking in my struggle. "I've already spent most of the rent you paid, Art," he said when I finished, his voice gentle. "Used it to fix the roof on another property, down in West Seattle." He rubbed his jaw, a thoughtful gesture. "But I understand what you're going through. Lost my own daughter to a custody battle years ago. Never got to see my grandkids grow up. A piece of your heart just gets ripped out." He was quiet for a moment, the shared pain a silent bond between us. "I'll refund half of what you paid for the remaining months. That's $2,100. After that, I can rent the place out again. Probably get more for it anyway, with the market the way it is." I stood up so fast I almost knocked over my chair, a surge of overwhelming gratitude washing over me. I grabbed his hand and shook it hard, over and over, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Wally," I said, my voice breaking, unable to find adequate words. "Thank you," Wally nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Just promise me you'll get that little girl back, Art. Promise me you'll see those grandkids safe." "I will," I said, my voice firm with renewed conviction. "I swear I will." Over the next few days, I sold everything I could. The furniture went first. A young couple from down the street, just starting out, bought the couch and the coffee table for $200, eager for the discount. A college student took the old television and the stereo for another $150. The kitchen table, the mismatched chairs, the bookshelf, all gone. I gave some things to neighbors for free. Pots, pans, dishes, things Clara and Leo would need when we moved. Practical items that held no sentimental value. By the end of the week, the house was almost empty, stripped bare, echoing with the silence of abandonment, but it still wasn't enough.